Okay, hello and welcome. We're going to start in 1 or 2 minutes. Today, we're going to talk about how to improve your score in grammatical range and accuracy and in lexical resource in IELTS Speaking, and in particular in IELTS Speaking Part 2. There might be also a delay in the live stream. So, I might see your commentaries about 30 seconds later, if there are any commentaries. So before we start, could you please put a plus in the chat box so that I can see that, you can see and hear me, and everything's fine. So there are no technical issues. Okay, I believe I can see myself already. So without further ado, let's start the ball rolling. So we're going to look at an example of an IELTS Speaking Part 2 topic of the current season. And it says, describe an experience of online shopping that you had. Actually, the original task also mentions that you can, if you don't have experience of online shopping, you can just describe your experience of ordinary shopping in a brick and mortar shop. So you should say what you bought, why you bought it, what problems you had when shopping online, and explain how you felt about the purchase. Okay, so these are the bullet points. So I want you now to listen to my sample answer, to my model answer, and it will be difficult. It will be packed with a lot of advanced vocabulary, some idioms, a lot of advanced grammar structures and complex sentences. So the first time you listen to this model, just try to understand the gist, because maybe not all of you are so advanced. So just at first, try to understand the main ideas, like what did I buy? Why did I buy it? What problems did I have? And how did I feel about the purchase? You can also write your answers in the chat box, so that we have some kind of interactive live stream today. If you watch the recording, you can also type type your answers in the commentaries section. Okay, so once again, let's listen to the simple answer and be ready to answer these 4 questions. So I've been asked to talk about a situation when I bought something online, and although in this day and age technology spreads its legs in every nook and cranny, it was not until around a fortnight ago that I bought something online for the first time. This is because not only is the refund policy unclear to me in most online shops, but I'm also afraid of buying a pig in a poke. It was for this reason that all my life prior to that, I preferred buying things in brick and mortar shops. Having said that, a short while ago, a new book, which I had been dreaming of reading, was published, and the only way for me to buy it was in an online shop. You know, I'm a voracious reader and I just can't keep my hands away from a book with an intricate plot because I desperately want to know the outcome of the story. In fact, my friends often call me a serial bookworm or a lifelong bookworm, and as you might have already understood, it is true. For instance, should a book be interesting, I can read it from cover to cover in one sitting. I'm literally glued to the pages of the book if it is a page turner or a truly unputdownable read. Anyway, the book which I desperately wanted to buy was dedicated to modern environmental issues such as ozone layer depletion, soil erosion, carbon sequestration, fossil fuel fracking, geothermal energy use, greenhouse gas emissions, and their toxicity, and so on and so forth. Actually, it was my bosom friend Gleb who recommended that I should read this book, and hardly had I read about it when I realized that it was definitely worth reading. Had I not bought that book, I would have reproached myself numerous times. However, what made me think twice before buying the book was its price. For some reason, the price was so exorbitant that it cost a pretty penny, and I even considered it to be highway robbery. Apart from that, I was living on a tight budget at the time because I had just paid for a teacher training course, which also cost an arm and a leg, and I had to shell out for it. Nevertheless, um, I was ready to fork out for the book in spite of its extortionate price. Apart from that, everything went without a hitch, and I had this book delivered to my doorstep in just a few days. To say that I was on cloud nine is to say nothing. I was over the moon. I was in seventh heaven. I was on top of the world. Okay. So you can type your answers in the chat box if you wish. There might be a small delay, but of about 30 seconds or 1 minute, but I'm going to look at your commentaries from time to time. So what did I buy? The answer is that I bought a book. Now, why did I choose a book for IELTS Speaking Part 2? Well, the answer is quite simple because when I teach my students, we learn the topic like reading and books. We have a separate lesson, a special lesson dedicated to this, and we learn advanced expressions like I'm a voracious reader. I can read a book from cover to cover in one sitting. It's an unputdownable read, or it's a page turner, a very interesting book that makes you turn pages. My friends call me a serial bookworm or a lifelong bookworm, so there are some collocations and so on. And if I say that I bought a book, I can choose a topic, and I can choose a topic for which I know some advanced vocabulary. And you can also use these words in your speaking. So in my case, I said, okay, this book was about environment. Wow, environment. I'm so interested. Are you? Are you also interested in environment like me? So, and I could use advanced words related to environment such as ozone layer depletion, greenhouse gases and their toxicity, geothermal energy use. So, and there were also collocations at the same time. So there were advanced lexical items, uncommon lexical items, and there were collocations. Okay, so why did I buy it? Well, I already kind of answered it because according to the story, I'm a voracious reader. I really like reading books and so on and so forth. What problems did I have? So the problem was that the book was very expensive. Okay, in your speaking test, you can say that something was expensive or something was cheap in almost any speaking topic. Well, if not in part one, then in part two. If not in part two, then in part three. And it enabled me to use some advanced words related to something that was cheap or something that was expensive. Yeah, like it was highway robbery or daylight robbery and so on. Okay, and how did I feel about the purchase in the end? So in spite of all the seemingly insurmountable hurdles, I felt happy. And so that's the general content of this model, speaking part two model. Okay, so now let's listen for language. Let's listen again, and I want you to try to hear some examples of advanced vocabulary that I used in this model, in this model answer. So some of these words can actually be reused in other topics as well. So that's why it's quite convenient. I want you to listen and try to hear, well, whether you're watching the recording or whether you're watching it live, try to write it down. You can write it in the commentaries, you can write it in the chat box, or you can write it on a piece of paper. It's up to you. But as you listen for the second time, could you please try to hear, you probably, maybe you won't hear everything, but try to hear as much as you can and try to write down as many words as you can. So I used two advanced synonyms for the word expensive or high price. Okay, then I used two idioms, two true idioms, meaning that something was really expensive. Then I also used two phrasal verbs that mean to pay a lot, especially when the price is unexpected or unwanted. Okay, I also used four idioms, meaning I was happy. Okay, this is my style. You don't have to follow it. But when I take my IELTS, I use, like, for example, if I want to say I'm happy, I will use four idioms in a row. Like, I was over the moon, I was on top of the world. And I scored, like, it was actually like, this is what I did when I took my IELTS. I got band 9 in IELTS speaking. So this system works. I mean, it works for me. You don't have to follow it, but if you want, like, you can take some of the elements. Then, so these four items, like two synonyms, two idioms, two phrasal verbs, and four idioms, meaning I was happy, can be, well, pretty much, they can be used in many other topics. There were also two advanced expressions related to this particular topic. That's an expression meaning a traditional shop, and also an idiom, which means to buy something without seeing it or knowing if it is good enough. Okay, so let's listen again, and please try to hear these words and expressions and try to write them down. I'm going to give the correct answers after we listen. So I've been asked to talk about a situation when I bought something online, and although technology spreads its legs in every nook and cranny, it was not until around a fortnight ago that I bought something online for the first time. This is because not only is the refund policy unclear to me in most online shops, but I'm also afraid of buying a pig in a poke. It was for this reason that all my life prior to that, I preferred buying things in brick and mortar shops. Having said that, a short while ago, a new book, which I had been dreaming of reading, was published, and the only way for me to buy it was in an online shop. You know, I'm a voracious reader and I just can't keep my hands away from a book with an intricate plot because I desperately want to know the outcome of the story. In fact, my friends often call me a serial bookworm or a lifelong bookworm, and as you might have already understood, it is true. For instance, should a book be interesting, I can read it from cover to cover in one sitting. I'm literally glued to the pages of the book if it is a page turner or a truly unputdownable read. Anyway, the book which I desperately wanted to buy was dedicated to modern environmental issues such as ozone layer depletion, soil erosion, carbon sequestration, fossil fuel fracking, geothermal energy use, greenhouse gas emissions, and their toxicity, and so on and so forth. Actually, it was my bosom friend Gleb who recommended that I should read this book, and hardly had I read about it when I realized that it was definitely worth reading. Had I not bought that book, I would have reproached myself numerous times. However, what made me think twice before buying the book was its price. For some reason, the price was so exorbitant that it cost a pretty penny, and I even considered it to be highway robbery. Apart from that, I was living on a tight budget at the time because I had just paid for a teacher training course, which also cost an arm and a leg, and I had to shell out for it. Nevertheless, um, I was ready to fork out for the book in spite of its extortionate price. Apart from that, everything went without a hitch, and I had this book delivered to my doorstep in just a few days. To say that I was on cloud nine is to say nothing. I was over the moon. I was in seventh heaven. I was on top of the world. Okay, all right. So let's look at the words, the advanced words which were used here. So two synonyms for the word expensive or high price. So these words are exorbitant or extortionate. So exorbitant or extortionate. You can say exorbitant price or extortionate price. Don't just say cheap or expensive. I mean, you can say that. That's not the end of the world if you use simple words in your IELTS speaking. But you're losing an opportunity to use an uncommon advanced lexical item. Then two idioms, meaning that something was really expensive. So for example, well, what I said was, so it cost, or in the past, like it cost a pretty penny. In present, you would say it costs a pretty penny. So okay, let me just write it in the present. It costs a pretty penny. And you can also write like it costs an arm and a leg. You can also say it costs an arm and a leg. Okay, then two phrasal verb, which mean to pay a lot, especially when the cost is unexpected or unwanted. Then you can say to shell out or to fork out. I had to shell out for it. I had to fork out for it. Okay. Then four idioms meaning I was happy. You can say like you can say I was in seventh heaven, or here article the is optional. I was in the seventh heaven. Okay. You can also say I was over the moon. I was on top of the world. Okay, what else were there? I was on cloud 9. Yes, you can also say I was on cloud 9. So these are idioms which mean I was happy. Then a traditional shop is called a brick and mortar shop, sometimes bricks and mortar shop. So brick and mortar shop. And then an idiom meaning that to buy something without seeing it or knowing if it is good enough. It's to buy a pig in a poke. To buy a pig in a poke. This is not a commonly used idiom nowadays, but we're using an advanced idiom. So to buy a pig in a poke, and it's like it fits the context very well. All right. So I typed those words in the chat box. For those who are watching the recording, here are the words. You can take a screenshot if you want, or a photo. So expensive, high price, we can say extortionate price or exorbitant price. Idioms: to cost a pretty penny, to cost an arm and a leg. I think I also said it was highway robbery. But you can also say, in British English, you can say it is daylight robbery. Then phrasal verbs: to shell out, to fork out. I was happy, I was on cloud 9, I was over the moon, I was in seventh heaven, I was on top of the world. Then brick and mortar shop, and to buy a pig in a poke. Okay, so some of these words like cheap, expensive, these idioms, phrasal verbs, and advanced or uncommon lexical items, you can use them in many other topics. I was happy, you can also use this. I mean, you don't have to use all these 4 idioms like I do. I do. And the next time I take IELTS, I'm going to do that again. But if you feel that it's maybe not very natural or something, you can just use one. Okay, that's fine. But I think like the examiners who I talk to, they say, okay, well, you're playing by the rules. I mean, so you demonstrate your lexical resource, so that's fine. Then a traditional shop, and this idiom, to buy a pig in a poke, brick and mortar shop, to buy a pig in a poke, that's about online shopping in particular. Okay, now let's listen again, I think for the last time, and try to answer the question, which advanced which advanced grammar structures were used in the monologue? Now, if you know the name of this grammar structure, just you can write the name. If you don't know the name, but you understand that's that's an advanced grammar structure or a complex sentence, just try to copy several words, and then we'll discuss like which advanced grammar structures or which complex sentences were used in the monologue. Okay, so let's listen. Let's listen for the last time. Okay, there we go. So I've been asked to talk about a situation when I bought something online, and although in this day and age technology spreads its legs in every nook and cranny, it was not until around a fortnight ago that I bought something online for the first time. This is because not only is the refund policy unclear to me in most online shops, but I'm also afraid of buying a pig in a poke. It was for this reason that all my life prior to that, I preferred buying things in brick and mortar shops. Having said that, a short while ago, a new book, which I had been dreaming of reading, was published, and the only way for me to buy it was in an online shop. You know, I'm a voracious reader and I just can't keep my hands away from a book with an intricate plot because I desperately want to know the outcome of the story. In fact, my friends often call me a serial bookworm or a lifelong bookworm, and as you might have already understood, it is true. For instance, should a book be interesting, I can read it from cover to cover in one sitting. I'm literally glued to the pages of the book if it is a page turner or a truly unputdownable read. Anyway, the book which I desperately wanted to buy was dedicated to modern environmental issues such as ozone layer depletion, soil erosion, carbon sequestration, fossil fuel fracking, geothermal energy use, greenhouse gas emissions, and their toxicity, and so on and so forth. Actually, it was my bosom friend Gleb who recommended that I should read this book. And hardly had I read about it when I realized that it was definitely worth reading. Had I not bought that book, I would have reproached myself numerous times. However, what made me think twice before buying the book was its price. For some reason, the price was so exorbitant that it cost a pretty penny, and I even considered it to be highway robbery. Apart from that, I was living on a tight budget at the time because I had just paid for a teacher training course, which also cost an arm and a leg, and I had to shell out for it. Nevertheless, um, I was ready to fork out for the book in spite of its extortionate price. Apart from that, everything went without a hitch, and I had this book delivered to my doorstep in just a few days. To say that I was on cloud nine is to say nothing. I was over the moon. I was in seventh heaven. I was on top of the world. Okay, right. So let's look at what grammar structures were used in this monologue. So there was a range of cleft sentences. One of the structures that I used was it cleft sentences. So for example, you can say, he did it, but that's a simple sentence. Instead of saying this, if you want to emphasize the person who did it, you can say it was him who did it. Like my friend did something. It was my friend who did something. And here are some examples which I used in my monologue. It was not until around a fortnight ago that I bought something online for the first time. Now, it was for this reason that all my life prior to that, I preferred buying things in brick and mortar shops. Or it was my bosom friend Gleb who recommended that I should read this book. Okay, so please put a plus in the chat box if you want a video lesson on cleft sentences on this YouTube channel, or in the commentaries if you're watching the recording. So then there are also word cleft sentences. You can say something like, I like his sense of humor. That's a simple sentence. But instead, you can say, what I like best about him is his sense of humor. Or what made me think twice before buying the book was its price. Okay. Then inversion. So some people like it a lot. So two inversions are better than none, but try to use maybe one inversion in your speaking. Like if you start your sentences with only or not only, for example, the word order is like in a question. Like not only is the refund policy unclear to me in most online shops, but I'm also afraid of buying a pig in a poke. Okay, so when you have two ideas for your speaking, you can say not only is it the first idea, but it is also the second idea, especially if the second idea like makes it stronger. I mean, it is stronger than the first one, and they are on the same topic. So not only is the refund policy unclear to me, but I'm also afraid of buying a pig in a poke. Or when there are two things that happened one after another, and there was a short there was a short period between them, is hardly had I done something when something else happened. Hardly had we opened the window when the bird flew in. There is actually a live stream on my YouTube channel about grammar for IELTS. So there I talk more about inversion, how to use it, like how to use it in writing, how to use it in speaking, and so on. So hardly had I heard about it when I realized that it was definitely worth reading. Okay, please don't forget when. Hardly had I heard about it when I realized that it was definitely worth reading. Some students, they actually forget. Then another structure which you can use is like modal verb plus perfect infinitive. And as if you're talking to the examiner. And as you might have already understood, as you might have already guessed, as you might have already imagined. So you can use like this structure in almost any speaking part 2 monologue. And basically all these structures, well, this is my position that all these grammar structures can be used in virtually any speaking part 2, especially if this is well, if you're describing an event or a situation, because 99% of all the speaking part 2 topics, they are either about people, places, events or situations, activities, or things and phenomena. So there are 5 groups, and 99% of IELTS topics, they fall into these categories: people, places, events and situations, activities, and then things and phenomena. So for example, in the current season, the only topic that doesn't fall into these categories is like describe a historical period. All others they fall into one of these 5 categories. And especially, so if you're describing events and situations, these constructions, they fit perfectly, but basically you can use them in other types as well. Okay. And finally, you can also use conditional sentences. Even if you're using a first conditional, that's already a plus for your grammar. You're using a complex sentence, and it adds to the variety of complex sentences which you use. So that's good. But you can also use third conditional. If I hadn't bought that book, I would have reproached myself numerous times. I heard this recommendation from one IELTS examiner, and he said, you can use third conditional. What will, and you'll impress the examiner. So I asked him, what will happen if you use third conditional with inversion? And he said, your examiner will have a heart attack. Well, it was a joke, of course, but you can also use third conditional and with inversion. Instead of, if I had not bought that book, you can say, had I not bought that book, I would have reproached myself numerous times. So for your stories in part 2, you can, like pretty much in any situation, you can say, if something hadn't happened, something else would not have happened, or something else would be different now. So you can also use a mixed conditional. Then if a book is interesting, instead of saying if a book is interesting, you can say, should a book be interesting, I can read it from cover to cover in one sitting. Okay, so you can also use like this conditional sentence with inversion. So these are grammar structures. They can be used in pretty much any speaking part 2. Again, there are many different ways to achieve a high band score in IELTS speaking. And it doesn't mean that you have to use these constructions, you have to use these particular idioms. But it's just one of the possible ways. And well, this is my style. If you like it, if you like any of these elements, you can borrow them and you can use them in your speaking. Okay, right. Okay, and now we're going to listen to another sample answer. It wasn't recorded specifically for IELTS speaking. This is a story told by a native speaker about an online shopping experience. In fact, it was a nightmare online shopping experience. So we're now going to listen to it, and it won't be so heavily packed with grammar, like complex sentences and advanced vocabulary, but just try to listen to it, listen to the story, and also try to take notes of what grammar structures or what complex sentences were used in that story, and which you could incorporate in your IELTS speaking later. Okay, so let's watch this, and then we'll discuss the types of complex sentences which were used there, and which can also be implemented in your speaking.
Five years ago, when I was 19, I was conducting an online transaction on a site called IELTS, which is similar to Craigslist. It's an online app where you can see items being sold by random strangers, and all you have to do is make a call and meet up. I was looking for a cheap sweater for my trip to Japan the following week. After several minutes of scrolling, I came across an ad with exactly what I was looking for. A Korean-style female fur sweater for just 300 pesos, about $6. It was perfect. I had issue with it. The meetup point was at the LRT train station at 8 p.m. because the seller was too busy at work. I decided, what the heck, it's a public place anyway. I called the owner and we had a quick convo. He sounded like a strict guy, but I asked him when we could meet up. He responded, tonight at 8 p.m. sharp. I said sure. But this recklessness of mine is what I regret the most. I arrived at the meeting place at 7:58 p.m. It was really empty, and I was sure I was the only person in the station. It was a cold night in November, and I eagerly awaited warming myself with my coat. Honestly, I'm the kind of girl who's comfortable wearing a sweater even when it's hot. I was sitting on a bench when the clock ticked 8 o'clock, when suddenly someone covered a really strange scent. I fell unconscious. As I woke up, I found myself in a van with 4 guys, my wrists handcuffed behind my back. I asked the man what they wanted and to please let me go. Tears began to fall from my eyes. But then, one of the guys touched my face and said, "It's our first time ever tasting a beautiful girl like you." I kept on crying and shouted, "Please, I want to go home, please." The guy next to me choked me, shouting that I needed to shut up. I tried to resist, but my eyes started to roll back in my head. He stopped, but it was taking a long time for me to catch my breath. I looked out the window and saw a checkpoint lane. For the first time in my life, I was so glad that the authorities had permission to check the van. But the guy next to me reached for a gun, a really big gun. Knowing this was my only chance, I found the strength to shout and cried out, "Officer, please help! They have a gun!" The 2 officers immediately grabbed their guns, one shooting at the tires, the other aiming for the man next to me. The officer shot him in the head. I never thought I'd witness such a thing in my life. One of the officers carried me out of the van, and I passed out moments later. I woke up the next day in a hospital bed. My parents were there, crying and asking me what happened. I told them the truth, that I was buying a sweater online. But I suddenly snapped. I cried and cried, saying, "Please help, please help." Since then, I've had to go to a psychiatrist to recover from mental instability and anxiety, and it should go without saying, but I never ever want to buy anything online, ever again.
Okay, so that was a story, a tragic one, a tragic story. Um, um, but let's look at some grammar structures which were used there, some complex sentences, which you could also use in your speaking. Okay, so the list is right here. So the narrator used complex object. So that's a website where you can see items being sold. There were also cleft sentences, like in my story, but it's what we call a reverse cleft sentence. This recklessness of mine is what I regret the most. Or all you have to do is make a call and meet up. So these are cleft sentences. There were also some relative clauses, like I was sure I was the only person at the station. I'm the kind of girl who's comfortable wearing a sweater. I never thought I'd witness such a thing in my life. So these are relative clauses, then clauses of concession. I'm the kind of girl who's comfortable wearing a sweater even when it's hot. So while, whilst, whereas, although, these are called contrast clauses or clauses of concession. And clauses of time. As I woke up, I found myself in a van with 4 guys. Reported speech or indirect questions. I asked the man what they wanted. And participial constructions, like knowing this was my only chance, I found the strength to shout. Okay, these are some of the structures which you can also use in your speaking. Okay. Then she also used some less common lexical items like recklessness, scent, choke, or snap. Okay, so well, these are some possible approaches to structuring your IELTS speaking part 2 in terms of grammar and vocabulary. If you have any commentaries, if you have something to add, if there are any other interesting grammar structures that can be used quite often in different topics, for example, or if you disagree with something, you feel free to write your commentaries under this video. I always reply. And thank you for watching this live stream. If you also have any questions, you can type them in the chat box. I will just wait for a minute or two. And well, thank you all for participation and for watching.